A few microscope photos started the whole thought. At first, they looked like pictures of an expensive instrument. But the questions quickly moved somewhere else. Atoms. Crystals. Grains. Materials. Atoms were familiar. But what happens when atoms come together? What is a crystal? And what exactly is a grain? Crystal and grain sounded almost the same at first. After thinking about it for a while, a simpler picture appeared. Atoms can arrange themselves according to a regular pattern. That pattern is called a crystal. A grain is different. It is the region where that arrangement keeps the same direction. Crystal is the rule. Grain is the region. Scale changes the picture completely. An atom is extremely small. About 0.1 nanometers. Far beyond what we can see directly. A grain is much larger. Often measured in micrometers. A single atom cannot be observed easily. But a grain can be observed and measured. Both belong to the same material, yet they exist on very different scales. Inside a grain, there can be an enormous number of atoms. Even a small grain may contain countless atomic arrangements. That makes grain an interesting observation unit. It sits somewhere between a single atom and an entire material. Too large to be atomic. Too small to be the whole structure. Yet large enough to observe and track over time. A question appeared while thinking about grain. What if a seed is not defined by size? What if it depends on the purpose of observation? Sometimes an atom could be a seed. Sometimes a grain. Sometimes an entire building. Material science found grain somewhere between atom and material. Perhaps similar questions may appear again in HEM. The thought eventually returned to HEM. A long-standing question remained. How does a seed divide? When one seed becomes many, what rules should guide that process? What direction should it follow? What relationships should remain? What structure should appear? The question stayed open. That is where BCC entered the conversation. Not as an answer. Only as a starting point. There are other possibilities as well. FCC. HCP. The important thing is not memorizing names. The important thing is observing behavior. Try a hypothesis. Watch what happens. Revise if necessary. The day did not end with crystallography. Instead, it returned to the seed question. Crystal and grain became another way to look at an old problem. Perhaps a simple BCC hypothesis could become the first spatial rule. Perhaps it will eventually be wrong. That is acceptable. Observation continues either way. The person observes. Atoms arrange. Structure appears. And questions continue. The path started with microscope photos. Then moved through atoms, crystals, and grains. Eventually it returned to seed. Maybe crystal was not the destination. Maybe it was simply another clue along the way.